Welcome to Mobile Armor Radio, the podcast for all things Mecha.
Welcome to Mobile Armor Radio. This is a very special episode. We have a special guest here. It's Jonathan Wright from Mecha versus Kaiju? Mechs versus Kaiju? I can never remember. Mecha versus Kaiju. But you're here to talk about your new Kickstarter coming out soon.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Really quick, Mecha vs. Kaiju is an anime-inspired 5th edition role-playing game that puts you in the pilot seat of a giant robot.
Yeah, we checked out the quick start rules. They're available on your site, I believe. You got them from? Or?
It's on the site and on DriveThruRPG, where we've been selling the previous edition of Mecha vs. Kaiju since 2014. And we actually started in 2008 with a previous edition. I don't know if you ever heard of the True 20 role-playing game. It was one of the earlier 3rd edition variants. And so, like, first edition of Mecha vs. Kaiju was 2008. I sold, maybe 2 copies. And I figured that was it, right? Like, okay, I shot my shot, and whatever, I'll go back to teaching and do whatever. And then, of course, early 2010s, you get Pacific Rim is in development. Legendary has bought the rights to Godzilla, and all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, stuff is happening now. And that was where I did a Kickstarter for version for Fate Core. Which, as you can tell, is a smaller system, a lot more streamlined, focus on storytelling, not a whole lot of crunch. So I've always wanted to find something that would marry sort of storytelling with the crunchier side of role-playing games. And me and a friend, Jeremy Forbing, we decided to have a crack at 5th edition and see if we could take some of these narrative tools that we've been playing around with other systems and bring it into 5th edition. So, you can imagine this like a D&D game, but instead of static bonuses, you have dice. So, if you're like really strong, then you might have like a D8 strength. If you are just all thumbs with something, you might have a D4 dexterity. And so it's that idea. When you're doing an action, you're just picking dice from different trait sets and rolling them together with a D20. We call the D20 the fortune die because, sometimes it's in your favor and sometimes it's not.
Yep.
And then just like any other sort of D&D game, you just roll the D20, you add it to whatever is the next highest die. And then if fortune is really not in your favor, then maybe you're just relying on your stat and your skill roll and hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat system that you got there. And like you said, you've had a Patreon for quite a while showing off this game too, right?
Well, it's not just showing off. We've been developing it. We've had a Patreon for over a year, and the game has gone through some radical changes over time, just through play testing and figuring out what works best. And that's one thing that I think people like to hear, that oh wait, you've actually been running this and changing it and making it better over time. And so we've had, over the course of our Patreon, we've had over 60 playtesters who've and some of them got an ongoing campaign that's been running for over a year. We've got a bunch of other games with friends and things like that I've been running with this system. So it's probably the most playtested thing I've ever written, and it's really working. I created the D20 system that I always wanted to play, and I think that's one of the real joys.
Yeah, that's the beauty of making these independent games. You make it what you want, and then other people will come because they want it also.
Nice. So you said anime inspired. Just to stay with the theme of our show, what animes inspired this RPG for you?
Well, this, I mean, you can just look at the cover and see, like, Gundam is one of the number one inspirations. It was my first introduction to like mill sci-fi genre,
Hmm.
and seeing like the real damage that war does, and
Hmm.
the stress that people feel, um, the motivation of these soldiers, being more important than like what they can do. Like, even when you look at Macross, one of my other favorites, like even this ace pilot, is motivated by love, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
like it's more about who the characters are than what they can do. And so when we were creating this system, me and Jeremy like spent hours putting together the trait sets, which is just like, if you're not going to talk about how strong or how fast somebody is, what is really important? And that was what it came down to for Mecha versus Kaiju. It was, what kind of gameplay did I want to have? And the real touchstone was emulating anime and manga. So when you have when you have something like Naruto, who is motivated by this sense of like fun and challenging himself, and overcoming obstacles, um, and like because of that, he is like a world class ninja, right? So you look at that, like, how do you determine somebody's personal motivation, right? So you start with well, like with Fate Core, there would be something called aspects, and this was like the best part of the game. You would have descriptors for characters, or areas, or gadgets, or anything like that, and you just have a phrase that would describe it. And so that was something that we wanted to keep. So aspects are one of the most important things of your character: your personality, your drama, which is two motivating and conflicting needs or wants, or something like that. And that's all combined with your identity. So who you are on the outside, who you are on the inside, and what are the things that are driving you. Um, and every one of those, every action that you take is going to be determined by one of those things. Next is your style, how you do things. So, are you doing it, are you doing it quietly or loudly, or fast? And so we have descriptors for each of those. So if you take an action, let's say you're trying to get into a building, and you are bold. Well, okay, that's going to be a very different outcome than if you are subtle. And so, what do you say, like, Roy Fokker in Robotech would just, like, walk right up to the door, demand to go in, maybe punch the guy or something like that. Where someone like Naruto would go in the back door or climb in through a window. They're both getting in, but they're doing it in a very different way.
Mm. Okay.
And then the last thing is your values. What is important to you? And these come in these opposing pairs. So, so you've got like self-reliance, or getting along with other people. You've got spirituality or ferocity. So they come in these opposing pairs that are giving you the chance to decide as a character, like, what is more important to you. And then sometimes, you're kind of forced to do something in a way that isn't ideal, but that's what's appropriate for the scene. And we've seen it in, a thousand times in different anime. Like, somebody is forced to do something that is really not in their wheelhouse, and that's where some of the fun comes from.
Yeah, that's where the comedy
All right.
ensues.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's interesting that like your role playing actually affects the actual rules of the game, which is usually it's kind of around the rules, the role playing part, but you have it built right in, which is interesting.
And yeah, that's why, like, like I said, one of our watchwords was, we wanted to emulate the drama and the action of manga and anime. And so, in order to do that, you have to set things up to where, what the players are doing is going to affect sort of the way the rules work. I think we've done a good job with that. I'm really happy with the way it turned out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Uh, Also, for the game, is there a specific setting, or is it more agnostic, or?
There is a game setting built into the game, and it is inspired by everything I love. I mean, you don't have to dig very far to figure out where all the inspiration came from. Uh, uh, and the basic setting is 1945. Kaiju appear, and there are reasons, and there are secret reasons. But at the end of World War II, this group of corrupt leaders is trying to summon a demon to fight for Japan. And when it's summoned in Hiroshima the moment when the atomic bomb is dropped.
Yep.
So that mutates the demon. And so right there, you've got sort of like this mystic quality married with the science. And so that part just there gives you a lot of different directions that you can go in. Yeah. 1954, the king of the kaiju, Kaibutsu, shows up and attacks Tokyo. He's actually been genetically engineered by North Koreans. So you've got political elements going in there. I'm an English teacher, but I also have a credential in history. So I love alt history sorts of stories. And so what I did was I took the assumption that every single giant monster movie really happened. What does the world look like when you've got Godzilla running around, you've got Reptilicus in Europe, and you've got giant insects in America? For one thing, you've got a mess, but you also have things like America is not a superpower; it's too busy fighting giant insects. You've got you've got a complete breakdown of like sort of the colonial system. So everybody pulls out of Africa almost immediately so they can defend Europe. So like what happens to Africa? It's left to its own devices and it breaks up based on language groups. So the map for Africa is based on the different linguistic groups, and the nations are formed based on that. What happens to the Soviet Union when they realized that North Korea created the giant monsters? During the Korean War, we find out that Mao Zedong created a mutant army by using atomic radiation on his own people, and then you have just like the general crackdowns that the Soviet Union did in the 1950s. So everybody's done with communism. They're like, these guys are horrible. We're not going to have anything to do with them. So they have no political cachet. So they're just like three big communist nations that never expand. So you've got no superpowers. You've got no colonies. You've got everybody just like looking out for these giant monsters. So the world that spins out of that is very different from the one that we have. And that's not even counting giant robots in the mix.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be perfect for fiction. And do you have any plans to do books or anything for it, or short stories?
I'm pretty much keeping my writing just to the game. There's plenty of that to keep me occupied, and it's sort of like I've been a creative writer since I was in junior high. I had a junior high teacher that I would tell these stories to, and they said, you should write that down. And that was it. I was off to the races at that point. So ever since then, I've been writing, and this really just sort of like scratches that itch. I'm much more interested in creating sort of a framework that other people can tell their own stories in.
Yeah, for sure. That's the beauty of role-playing games, especially.
I was going to say the giant robot genres. I mapped all of the history of this world to the anime. So like. The first robot was a remote-controlled robot invented by a teenager, controlled by his watch, and then there was
Johnny Sakura's robot.
There you go, Tetsujin 13, and that whole genre there. 1970s, super robots. It's all about like a team of 5 pilots in a giant robot fighting one-on-one against kaiju. The 1980s, it's all about smaller, mass-produced mecha that are operating as a team, and so you've got squad-based combat. And if one of the mecha gets taken out, it's not as big a deal because you've got like 3 or 4 others there that can that can continue to fight the kaiju. So again, that's sort of like Gundam Macross style campaign, and that's the basic framework of the game. Is squad-based combat where each player is an ace pilot. So
Okay.
they get to customize their mecha and and fight in their own unique style. And then, as individual pilots, they also go off and they investigate mysteries. So, the conceit of the game, you know, reality, they would probably just be pilots and they'd be spending their time, like, in a pilot ready room and
Yeah.
maybe writing reports and
That's
doing
not
training.
how anime works. Yeah.
That is not how anime works. Exactly, they're out there, they're doing the things. So that's what this game is like. And the conceit is that in order to fight the kaiju, they need to have a very well-rounded concept of what's going on in the world. And the other conceit is that some of the monsters wear human faces. So there are mysteries and conspiracies that are operating in the background, and the starter adventure that I put out sort of teases out some of these ideas. But there is, like I say, you talk about my writing. There's close to 10 years of backstory that's been going on. So a lot of directions that people can go into just in the sort of vanilla world that I present for them. And then there's other source books that have there's a steampunk source book. There's a there's like a science like a high science fiction space source book. There's a Sentai team, Power Rangers style campaigns, and each of these has a different sort of flavor to the game world. So people can basically run whatever kind of game they want, even if they don't run it in if they don't run it in my world, I'm not going to hold it against them.
You could use it in any setting, and all those supplements can be plugged right into the main game. It's not like separate. Yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I've been going on 10 years now, writing close to 20 different supplements. Some of them just books of monsters, written in the style of that they would appear in the world. There's a group called Kaiju. Well, yeah. So there are Kaiju Taku, which are Kaiju Otaku, and they created an organization called the Kaiju Hanta, which is Hunter, and they put out a book called The Big Book of Kaiju, and it's the conceit of that is it was a zine in the 1950s, and these people were so obsessed with kaiju that they would name and give titles to the kaiju. So eventually, all like government people started using the names that these people were coming up with. So Kaibutsu is not like Kaiju 1. He's Kaibutsu, King of the Kaiju, and so that they just their work was so good that everybody else decided to go with it, and so again, that's me finding sort of logical ways to explain why these giant monsters have names.
And for the new version, all these old supplements are going to be compatible, or are you going to do newer versions of them, or?
They're new mechanics. So for the Kickstarter, each of these supplements is going to be a potential stretch goal. So ideally, for the core book, we'll have rules, setting, maybe like a half dozen kaiju to show kind of what different things that you can do, ways that you can create your own. And then, if things go well with the Kickstarter, one of the biggest stretch goals would be a separate copy of the Big Book of Kaiju. I've got 3 dozen kaiju that I've already created from the various supplements, air, sea, land, one supplement called just weird because some of the kaiju are weird, and then have them listed at different power levels. So the one of the stretch goals for the Kickstarter is a complete big book of kaiju.
Nice.
And then there's a bunch of different settings that we can go through. Like I said, Sentai, high science fiction, outer space adventures, steampunk adventures. So that could be another stretch goal of like just different settings. And each of those has sort of like an introduction timeline, and then it's just a toolbox of different types of tools that you can use to run these different types of games. Regardless of how the Kickstarter goes, even if it just fund the main book, I'm going to be doing these supplements because I love this stuff, and it's just a question of like how much, how soon it'll be able to come out. Will it be a physical book, or maybe just it'll be like this was the only this is the only physical book for the Fates game, and everything else was online supplements. So I could go that route as well, and all of those had a lot of people buy those, and were very happy and excited with them as well.
Yeah, I think it's really changing that PDFs are the new way to go. I'm amazed how many games just don't bother with books anymore. Like they're like, you might, like you say, have the core rule book as a hard copy, but the rest you just add what you want from the list of all the different PDFs, and it's the world is changing for sure in that way. So we might as well talk about. And sorry.
Well, I was going to say it democratized everything. Like everybody's got a chance.
Yeah,
to
you
put
don't have to worry about
out.
printing it. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you drive through RPG, you look at that. There's like thousands of things that are like $2.
Yeah.
Somebody just they put it together. They had an idea. They put it out there. I mean, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful that way. And Kickstarter too. It allows a lot of people to. Used to be you'd have to be one of these major publishers to get any of this stuff out, but now with Kickstarter, anybody can put games out. And your Kickstarter, you're going to be starting it in August 1st, is it?
Mm-hmm. August 1st, we're launching, and our goal is $6,000 to produce the first book. And the better we do, the bigger the stretch goals will be. Like I say, we've got I got 10 years worth of stuff that I can draw on. So
and that's the beauty of it. So you don't have to wait for you to write all this stuff. It's all there. You just got to convert it. It's not. That's the. Unlike a lot of things where there's a lot of promises that are, unicorns. This is truly right there. Like you have it all.
Yeah. And that was the beauty of the Patreon too, is that it's already written. Like the mechanics are all there. How much more I add just depends on how well the Kickstarter goes.
Yeah, that's really fun. And we will have links to everything in the show notes. So we'll have links to the Kickstarter page and your web page and the Drive-Thru RPG link for the beta for it too, which we checked out. And is there anything else you want to say before we head on out?
Just thanks for having me on, and giant robots are one of my passions, and so I'm just glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, thanks for coming on.
We love promoting these kind of content because the more games out there, I think the more variety, everybody gets what they want. So, and we love supporting the little guys too. So
yeah, for sure.
You got to keep up the great work.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And
all right, thanks, John.
We'll be back in a few days for the main episode. We'll be talking about more indie games actually. So tune in then. Until then, this has been Mobile Armor Radio and signing off. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mickey Mouse.
This has been Mobile Armor Radio. Join our Facebook group by searching for Mobile Armor Radio. Find us on Twitter @MArmorRadio. Join us on the first of every month for more Mecha discussion.